My fiancé Bruno, at the scene of a car accident and fire, risked his life to save his first love. As a result, his once handsome face was destroyed, now a mess of scars. Yet, he still comforted his first love, saying I would take over. My stomach churned, and I laughed silently, for the sake of the promise Bruno made back then, kneeling before me. Swearing he'd never let me down, I decided to let him go. I'll fulfill their true love. May they continue to love each other even when they have nothing left. Chapter 1. While taking care of my mother, who had just come out of surgery, I absent-mindedly opened the trending news. That was when I learned why Bruno, who hadn't answered his phone, had been unreachable. He had just been in a car accident and fire, risking his life to save his first love. Trapped in a car that could explode at any moment, he shielded her from the flames with his own body. The proud man who rarely lost composure had red eyes as he begged the firefighters to save his love first. The video from the scene went viral, and the comments below were all admiring the pure love. I clenched my phone silently. Bruno and Clara were lovers? Then what was I, his girlfriend of 6 years? His legitimate fiancé? I forced myself to stop overthinking and hurried to Bruno's hospital room. The moment I entered, I saw Clara still holding his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. Bruno, it's all my fault. You're about to get engaged. But now your face is scarred because of me. Bruno's face was marred with bloody wounds, the scars disfiguring what used to be his handsome features. He gently pulled Clara into a soft embrace. Don't be afraid. This was my choice. And don't worry about Fiona. She's always been understanding. If she cares about my face, she doesn't deserve to stay by my side. Once again, the usually cold person looked at her with such tenderness. But it wasn't for me. Hearing the words doesn't deserve, a sharp pain pierced my heart, and I smiled bitterly to myself. He really thought he had me completely under his control. I suppose that makes sense. I have, after all, been following behind him for so many years, trying to catch up. Fiona! I snapped out of it. Clara was now holding onto my arm. Fiona, it's all my fault that Bruno's face ended up like this. You love him so much. I'm sure you wouldn't mind his scars for saving me. Would you? Clara, facing away from Bruno, gave me a mocking smirk. Anger surged, and I shoved her away. If you know your trouble, why do you keep sticking around? You really are something. Bruno frowned immediately, interrupting me coldly. Enough. Fiona, Clara already feels guilty. There's no need to say more. I slowly clenched my fist, my nails digging into my palm. Clara turned back to face Bruno, tears welling up before she could even speak. Bruno, please don't blame Fiona. She's just worried about you. Besides, this is all my fault. If your scars cause any rift between you and Fiona, I'll live with that guilt forever. Bruno gently patted her head. Don't be silly. A few scars are nothing for a man. Don't overthink it. Bruno then turned to me, his gaze deep and his voice still that same familiar lecturing tone. Fiona, do you not think before you speak? You're being emotional and disrespectful. Apologize to Clara right now. Chapter 2. My heart clenched in pain, the bitterness like an overflowing pond, seeping out bit by bit. Apologize? Why should I apologize? Ever since I was young, I've watched Bruno rush to Clara time and again, and now, he's even risking his life to protect Clara, at the cost of disfigurement. Even though Clara is about to marry someone else, even though I am his legitimate fiancé. I took a deep breath, holding back my tears, stubbornly locking eyes with Bruno. Bruno, don't forget that I'm your girlfriend. I tilted my head and sneered at Clara. All these years, some people have stirred up trouble time and again, but let's put that aside for now. Now, you're about to get married, yet you're still tangled up with someone else's fiancé. What is that? Knowing you're the other woman and shamelessly still pursuing it. Clara's eyes turned red, a mist of grievance filling her gaze. Fiona, how could you think that of me? I've always seen Bruno as a brother. Though she spoke to me, her face was turned towards Bruno. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she struggled to keep her voice steady. I understand now. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have disturbed you too. I'll leave now. Clara covered her mouth, wiping her tears, and ran out of the room, sensing the man beside me moving as well. I instinctively grabbed him. The next second, a slap landed hard on my face. Caught off guard, I was knocked down, my head buzzing as I looked up in shock, only to meet Bruno's eyes, cold as winter frost. "Fiona, who gave you the right to treat Clara like that?" Bruno, always composed and rarely angry, now lashed out at me physically over Clara's tears. In an instant, it felt like my heart had torn open, a cold wind rushing in. Bruno left me with a "take care of yourself" before hurrying out of the room. I collapsed back to the floor. Suddenly, a text notification buzzed. How pathetic. I closed my eyes tightly. It was such a simple trick to see through, but Bruno always chose to play dumb. How ridiculous. I struggled to my feet, leaning against the wall, but just as I stood halfway, a sudden pain shot through my lower back, and I fell to the ground again. I remembered then I'd hit the corner of the bedside table when I fell. It really hurt. I bit my lip hard. Chapter 3. I forced myself to suppress my emotions, because a nurse came to tell me that my mother had woken up. When I entered my mother's room, I had already composed myself. "You've worked so hard, sweetheart." The exhaustion and frailty on my mother's face couldn't be hidden. I walked up to tuck her in properly. "It wasn't hard at all, as long as you're safe and sound. That's all that matters." "Fiona, why isn't Bruno here?" My hand paused, and then I smiled calmly. "Oh, he was just at the hospital, but he got called away by a phone call. There's an urgent project at the company that needs to be completed. He said he'll come see you later." My mother gave me a probing look. "Tell me the truth." "You too." I smiled, interrupting her. "That's the truth. Bruno's just busy with work. He even said he felt really guilty." I pretended to busy myself with tidying up, turning away so my mother wouldn't see the dim look in my eyes. It was a lie. He wasn't at the hospital because of my mother, and certainly not for me. Once my mother fell asleep, I returned to my company. As the CEO, I had many things to deal with, but when I looked at the financial report, I realized that Bruno had unilaterally terminated a major project contract. Why wasn't I informed about such a big issue? You were about to get engaged to Bruno. And besides, you implied that Bruno could make decisions directly. The anger in my chest instantly froze. Right, I had granted that authority. Back then, when my father suddenly passed away, I hadn't yet finished my studies. Bruno had offered to help. Later, he kept using my inexperience as a reason to meddle in company affairs without question. I thought our families would soon be connected by marriage, so I kept silent. I never imagined that Bruno would be so out of line. I immediately called him. "What's with that contract? The two families have been working on that project for so long, and it's almost finished, and you decide to change it just like that?" On the other end of the line, his voice was dismissive. "Clara is getting married soon. We're all friends, so think of it as a wedding gift for her." I forced myself to speak through my anger. "This is a huge project, and we've spent significant resources to almost complete it. And now, just a few careless words from you, and you want to ignore the losses? What kind of gift is so precious?" "Bruno, you..." "Enough," Bruno interrupted impatiently. "Fiona, I never knew you were so petty. You made Clara cry earlier today. Shouldn't you apologize and make it up to her?" "This ends here." Before I could respond, he hung up. I clenched my phone tightly, remembering that text message, anger boiling inside me. I drove straight to Bruno's company. Chapter 4. Just as I reached the office door, I heard voices from inside. The door was half open, and I saw Bruno with his back to me, speaking passionately. "What do I lack compared to others? Fiona is head over heels for me. Why can't you see me? For you. I even stayed with someone I don't love. I thought you would care, but all you said was congratulations?" I stumbled back, my body weak as I leaned against the wall. My mind went blank for a moment, before a wave of sorrow crashed over me. It was fake. Everything was fake. Bruno had always been in love with Clara. Even his pursuit of me back then was just to spite her. Then what did I mean to him? Inside, Bruno suddenly pulled Clara into his arms and kissed her deeply. The sound of lips intertwining, the wet, sticky noises, and the occasional soft moans echoed in my ears. Through the gap in the door, I locked eyes with Clara. She looked surprised for a moment. Then a mocking smile appeared. Clara stared at me, gently stroking Bruno's back, as if encouraging him. Arrogant provocation. I dug my fingers into the wall, but in the end, I couldn't bring myself to push open that half-closed door. Bruno, Clara, and I had grown up together. When my heart first opened to love, I found myself admiring the cold and proud Bruno, but in his eyes, there was only Clara. It wasn't until Clara went abroad for her studies that he turned his attention to me. I took a deep breath, but still felt suffocated, instinctively clutching my chest and bending over. I've never been the naive and sweet type, even though I was flattered by Bruno's sudden closeness. Once I calmed down, doubts crept in. I wouldn't allow myself to be anyone's replacement, but it was him who knelt and swore there was no one else. It was him who promised, with such deep affection, that I was the only one for him. I looked up in a daze, seeing my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. I realized that at some point, tears had started streaming down my face. I felt as though something inside me was slowly loosening. Fiona? Chapter 5. Fiona, what are you doing here? Did you? Oh no. You didn't misunderstand again, did you? A deliberately surprised voice called out from behind me, but I didn't turn around. Fiona, what's with the sulking? The familiar cold voice of Bruno reached my ears. For some reason, a surge of irritation rose in my heart. Why aren't you saying anything? Are you suspecting something between Clara and me again? I've explained it so many times. You're being unreasonable. Or is it about the project? I've said it before. Think of it as a wedding gift from both of us to Clara. Don't. Bruno rarely spoke this much. It wasn't like him at all. I thought to myself quietly. I'd heard that people become like this when they're guilty. I only turned around when the tears on my face had dried completely, and the first thing I saw was Bruno still holding Clara's hand. The two of them stood side by side. So close. Just like when we were kids. I gave a self-mocking smile. Although the three of us grew up together, I was always on the outside. There was no room between the two of them. No matter how hard I tried, I could never fit in. I was slightly surprised at how calmly I could admit that now. Seeing my eyes fixed on their clasped hands, Bruno suddenly let go. His expression became awkward as he looked at me, wanting to say something but hesitating. Fiona, I interrupted him softly. About the project. Talk to my secretary, handle it professionally, follow the procedures, and sort out the compensation for the breach of contract. With that, I turned to leave, but Bruno called after me. Let's have dinner together tonight. I didn't look back. No, I'm busy. Yet, for once, Bruno, always so reserved, stepped forward and grabbed my arm. I turned, meeting his gaze. His eyes were complicated as he stared at me intently. We still need to discuss the engagement arrangements. It was the first time Bruno had spoken to me in such a conciliatory tone. I hesitated for a moment. By the time I came back to my senses, I had already agreed. Chapter 6. Bruno and I casually agreed on having a Western dinner. In the past, I would always put in the effort to find topics to talk about, and he only needed to respond occasionally. But now, I had no desire to speak. For a while, an awkward silence filled the table. Finally, Bruno couldn't sit still any longer. He cleared his throat. Clara is getting married. And I remained calm on the surface as I said, let's put it on hold for now. Bruno frowned. Fiona, about what happened this morning. I'm really sorry. I acted impulsively. I just didn't want you to overthink things. I looked at Bruno calmly, thinking, how can someone be such a pretender? Listening to the same tired words. I was just about to interrupt him when both our phones rang simultaneously. Are you a relative of Sandra? She's having a major hemorrhage. Her condition is critical. The family needs to come over right away. You should contact all her relatives. The situation isn't looking good. The fork in my hand fell to the ground. A wave of immense fear washed over me, and I said in a trembling voice, Doctor, please do everything you can. After hanging up, I instinctively called out to Bruno, we need to go to the hospital right now. Fiona, I have to go. Clara's having a meeting about her wedding today, and she's upset. I need to check on her. Bruno cut me off hurriedly, and without waiting for a response, he stood up and rushed out. I grabbed him, my eyes reddening. Bruno, my mom is in trouble. You drove here. Please take me to the hospital. Bruno hesitated for a moment. But Clara, my eyes flared with anger, and I shouted, Bruno, do you have any sense of priority? My mom's been given a critical notice. Do you understand? I stared straight into Bruno's eyes, enunciating every word. You take me to the hospital now. Bruno hesitated, uncertainty flashing across his eyes. Just then, his phone rang again. As Bruno picked up, Clara's tearful voice came through. Bruno, I feel terrible. Panic flashed in his eyes. The next second, he pulled his hand away from mine without hesitation. Sorry, Fiona. You take a cab. I'll catch up at the hospital later. Watching his decisive retreating figure, I felt something in my heart, something that had been barely holding on, shatter completely. I couldn't stop gasping for air. I raced to the emergency room, watching the red light above the door, my hands clasped in prayer. But the gods did not favor me this time. The doctor came out and shook his head, motioning for me to go in to see my mother one last time. I rushed to my mother's bedside, tears streaming down my face. She was still unconscious, even her breathing barely holding on. When she saw me, she struggled to open her eyes wider, her breathing suddenly quickening. My mother looked behind me. There was no one there. She tightly gripped my hand. He's not good. Don't hold on. Let go. Let go. Be happy. By then, my face was covered in tears. My mother had known. She had always known. That day, by my mother's deathbed, I cried in anguish. I swore, I won't hold on anymore. I won't love Bruno again. Chapter 7. For several days, I forced myself to endure the grief and took care of my mother's affairs. And Bruno, it was like he was dead, no news at all, until I received a call from a business partner. Boss, Bruno drank too much tonight, and he won't leave no matter what. He keeps calling out a name. Clara, is that your nickname? We really can't persuade him. Could you come and check on him? I suddenly remembered. Tomorrow was Clara's wedding. Hearing the partner's anxious tone, I eventually went. After dealing with the drunk and sending the partner away, I found that Bruno, who was sprawled out on the sofa, had opened his eyes at some point, staring straight at me. Clara, his slightly upturned eyes were clouded with a drunken daze, his gaze deep as if filled with tenderness. Too bad the scars crisscrossing his face ruined the moment. The scars left on his face were a result of him willingly playing the fool. It just made it seem stupid and disgusting. I looked at Bruno with an expressionless face. After letting go of the last bit of feelings I had for him, I suddenly felt clear-headed. I shook my head and prepared to leave. After all, Bruno's life or death was none of my concern. If it weren't for the partner's dilemma, I wouldn't have come. But Bruno suddenly got up and pulled me towards him. I was caught off guard, and he pressed me under him. His breath, mixed with alcohol, sprayed on my face from such a close distance. I turned my head, feeling a wave of nausea in my stomach. The man above me continued to pour out his affection. Clara, you're getting married, and we can't be together anymore. I've been disfigured. How could I be worthy of you? I can only marry someone I don't love. I can only protect you silently. Maybe in the next life. As he spoke, the man moved in to kiss me. I slapped him across the face. Bruno's head turned from the force of my slap. Before he could react, I punched him, making him lose his balance and fall off the sofa. I stood up, fixing my collar as I looked at the drunken man on the floor, coldly laughing. Secretly protecting your first love after marriage? Bruno, you really are shameless. Marry me? In your dreams. Without sparing another glance at the bewildered man on the ground, I left the room. I hadn't expected that as soon as I stepped out, I'd receive a call from Clara. Fiona, tomorrow I'm marrying the son of the richest man in the city. You should come and witness my happiness. And by the way, see how devastated Bruno is. Every word dripped with malicious intent. I let out a snort. What? Not pretending anymore? Weren't you calling me Sister Fiona not long ago? Clara spoke dismissively. I gave you face. And you took it seriously? Bruno just falls for my tricks. Watching you follow behind him all these years, pathetically wagging your tail for him. I couldn't help but laugh. Let me guess. You're just waiting for me to get married so you can pick up the disfigured reject I leave behind, aren't you? You think he'll ever fall for you? Too bad. You're destined to always live in my shadow. Listening to her arrogant taunts, I just clapped my hands slowly, my tone unhurried. Well, then, I wish you a happy wedding in advance. My calm response caught Clara off guard. After a pause, she spoke again, her tone betraying her anger. But I didn't give her the chance to keep rambling. I hung up the phone. The frosty mist of the winter blurred the cold smile in my eyes. Happy wedding. Be sure to check out the surprise I prepared for you. Chapter 8. The next day. Dressed in all black, I arrived at the wedding venue. The wedding of Pablo, the son of the richest man, naturally attracted many elites and celebrities. I looked around, seeing the well-dressed guests coming to celebrate, and I sat down with satisfaction, just waiting for the bride's shining moment. There was still some time before the wedding started, and I was getting bored. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from behind me. Fiona, what are you doing here? I turned around and was met with Bruno's slightly unpleasant expression. Are you following me? He scanned my attire up and down, frowning, and scolded in a low voice. Today is Clara's wedding. Why are you dressed all in black? Why are you always against her? I let out a scoff, looking at him mockingly. Get it straight, Bruno. Who's against whom? Your face may be ruined, but don't let that make you give up on treatment for your eyes. Bruno's pupils contracted at my words. He was clearly stunned by my sharp words, something he wasn't used to from me. Usually so obedient. As he came back to his senses and was about to get angry, the lights dimmed. The wedding had begun. When Clara, dressed in her wedding gown, walked by, she shot me a smug look. I kept my expression unchanged, maintaining my smile while the interest in my eyes grew deeper. Just wait. Finally, as Clara's eyes filled with tears and she was about to say her vows, the spotlight on the platform suddenly went out. Immediately afterward, the photo of the newlyweds on the big screen was replaced with a collage of Clara with different men. The largest picture in the middle was one of Bruno passionately kissing Clara. Instantly, the entire venue was in an uproar. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Bruno's face turn deathly pale. On stage, the groom had already let out a cold laugh and roughly pushed Clara away. Clara fell to the ground, shaking her head repeatedly, her face full of fear. She struggled to crawl towards the groom, trying to grab him. No, it's not true. This is photoshopped. Pablo, please listen to me. Before Clara could get close to Pablo, she was harshly kicked aside by the bodyguards who had rushed forward. Pablo looked down at her with a sneer, his eyes full of contempt. Idiot. The deal is off. Meanwhile, the video continued to play on the screen. It had already switched to an uncensored video of Clara with others. In the clip, Clara's expression was suggestive, lewd, perfectly matching the high-definition photo that had just been shown, with the surrounding whispers growing too loud to ignore. I slowly walked up to the platform and took the microphone from the officiant. In front of all the guests, I listed, one by one, all of Clara's disgraceful acts. Wretched woman. Chapter 9. Clara screamed as she lunged at me, her eyes filled with hatred, but she forgot she was still wearing a heavy and cumbersome wedding dress. I swiftly dodged to the side. Clara missed and tripped over her own dress, falling to the ground. The wedding gown had already started slipping down from her struggling, and now she was nearly exposing herself. A complete mess. The discussions among the guests grew louder, and some of the playboys were either cheering or whistling. At this moment, Bruno stepped onto the stage, his face dark as iron. Clara's eyes lit up at the sight of him, and she struggled to throw herself at him, attempting to look pitiful. Bruno, these are all fake. I don't know why Sister Fiona would try to harm me like this. For the first time, Bruno pushed her away without even sparing her a glance. His eyes locked on me. You knew all along? Why didn't you say anything? I looked at him with disdain, but before I could respond, a snicker came from behind me. Tell you what? Tell you that the woman you hold as your first love is actually a shameless whore? Tell you how foolish you've been? Pablo walked up beside me. He had already removed his groom's jacket, now wearing just a white shirt, exuding an air of relaxed indifference. Bruno's face stiffened, his eyes darkening. Pablo, this has nothing to do with you. Pablo raised an eyebrow. How does it not? The woman who almost became my bride was mixed up with someone like you. Am I not allowed to speak? Besides, it's bad enough you're ugly, but you're also blind. Pablo shook his head in mock sympathy, then stepped to the side and motioned toward me. Passing up such a beautiful woman for that trash. Fiona, you're not blind, why not just kick him to the curb and date me? He openly winked at me in front of Bruno, facing those playful eyes. I couldn't help but smile. However, the smile at the corners of my lips was enough to provoke a certain someone. Bruno's face turned dark as he stepped between Pablo and me. Blocking his gaze, he grabbed my wrist, pulling me behind him, while giving Pablo a warning look. Pablo, show some respect, this is my fiancé. Feeling his skin against mine made me feel sick. I kicked the back of Bruno's leg, and he was caught off guard, falling to his knees. Seeing his shocked and angry face, I finally smiled, my eyes full of malice. Bruno, who gave you the guts to speak to Pablo like that? I'm not your fiancé. Our engagement is off. Trash. That slap, I return it to you. With that, I didn't spare a glance at Bruno's suddenly pale face and turned to leave the venue. I walked out the door, feeling completely unburdened. Suddenly, I felt a slight weight on my shoulder. The next second, a deep, teasing voice came close to my ear. Putting on such a good show with you, looks like I've disgraced my family entirely. So, how are you going to repay me? Chapter 10. I subtly dodged Pablo's approach. Facing his intrigued gaze, I raised an eyebrow and smiled. Mr. Pablo, you're joking. How could this be considered disgracing the richest family? Clearly, it's all Clara's doing. Besides, if I remember correctly, when it came to this deal, someone here was quite eager to jump in even before I promised anything. Weren't they? Pablo laughed it off, his previously straight posture slouching as he reverted to his usual lazy and irreverent playboy demeanor. All right then, just take it as a good show. It wasn't disappointing. He had one hand in his pocket and was twirling a car key with the other. Come on, let me give you a ride. That's when I noticed a Ferrari parked at the entrance, bright red, just like his flamboyant personality. I quietly messaged my driver not to come. After that, I unceremoniously got into Pablo's car. At the same time, Bruno rushed out of the wedding hotel. Just for a moment, our gazes crossed. Under his dark and furious stare, the car roared to life. Pablo cheered as we sped off. In the rearview mirror, I saw Bruno standing there, staring for a long time. All right, stop looking. What's so interesting about that guy? A slightly displeased voice came from my side, and I chuckled softly. Pablo, driving, casually said to me, hey, now that you've broken up with him, why not consider me for your second spring? After all, I helped you a lot and got you a good revenge. I squinted my eyes slightly. Mr. Pablo, I can't just owe a favor without a return. The key project my company secured, let's replace Bruno's company with your group as our partner. This time, it's an equal trade. That's right. After dealing with my mother's funeral, I contacted Pablo, exchanged interests, and convinced him to help me investigate Clara. Clara had never been someone who kept her nose clean. So, I gambled that she had hidden some black history from her time studying abroad. And I won. During the cooperation, I learned that Pablo and Clara were also part of a transaction. He was using a flash marriage to deal with his family's matchmaking pressures. Once he learned the truth, he intended to cancel the wedding right away. But I stopped him. I offered the provincial key project that my company won in exchange for Pablo's cooperation, to expose Clara's scandal at the wedding in front of everyone. That was the gift I gave Clara. The car stopped, and Pablo suddenly leaned in closer. Too close. Those charming eyes seemed amused, and his slightly curled eyelashes lightly brushed against my face. Pablo whispered, what if I said I'm serious? I subtly glanced at the hand beside my waist. It looked like it was naturally hanging there, but its position was strategic, one move, and it could trap me. I kept a straight face, pretending to be troubled. Even if you're serious, I can't let you have any concessions on this key project. Pablo looked stunned. Then, realizing what I said. He leaned back in his seat, laughing quietly. I ignored him, unbuckled my seatbelt, and opened the door to get out. As I stepped out of the car, I heard him say, "If he bothers you again, call me." I remained unfazed. A promise from the boss is worth gold. We won't let your group down either. I could see the admiration in Pablo's eyes, and I knew he was interested in me. From all perspectives, this man was almost impeccable, but rather than focusing on him, I was more interested in the group behind him. After severing ties with the maddening past and being free from emotional entanglements, I felt incredibly clear-headed. As the heir of my family, I would fulfill my father's unfulfilled wishes and lead the family business to new heights. Chapter 11. Back at the company, I immediately ordered the cancellation of all previous collaborations with Bruno's family company. Our company made it clear we were completely cutting ties with Bruno's company. The news spread quickly, and other enterprises watched cautiously from the sidelines. My company was weaker compared to Bruno's, so taking the initiative to cancel the partnership raised many eyebrows in the industry. Those in the know revealed the rift between Bruno and me, and so, many scoffed, predicting my company's inevitable downfall. After all, its CEO was nothing but an inexperienced young girl who acted emotionally. I ignored the rumors, steadily moving forward according to my plan. Amid my busy schedule, my secretary informed me that Bruno had arrived. Following your instructions, we kept Bruno from going upstairs, but he's insisting on waiting in the lobby. We couldn't just kick him out, so we arranged for him to wait in the guest room. The secretary looked troubled, so I went downstairs. It had only been a few days, but Bruno had lost a lot of weight and looked haggard. His face was scarred and covered in scabs, making his appearance rough and disheveled. Bruno was holding a bouquet of roses. When he saw me, his expression immediately softened. "Fiona, I bought your favorite flowers." I took a step back, my expression cold. "Bruno, if this is about business, arrange a meeting with the secretary. I shouldn't need to teach you that." Bruno rubbed his forehead, his voice weary. "Fiona, stop playing games. Our companies were working well together, and now you're acting like this? How does that make us look? It looks like ex-lovers tearing each other apart." I laughed out loud. "Don't tarnish my reputation. Bruno, we both know we were just acquaintances at best." That remark stung Bruno. He spoke urgently. "You're not even giving me a chance to explain?" "Yes, I admit, I used to have feelings for Clara, but that's in the past. I've realized now, I'm sure of it, the one I love is you." Those words made my breath hitch, trying to suppress the urge to roll my eyes. I spoke sarcastically. "Your love must be cheap and practically invisible then." Bruno looked at me with an expression of restrained pain. His eyes filled with sadness. "I know it was my fault before, letting past feelings mislead me and causing you pain. But I've come to understand my heart now, and I know how hard it must have been for you. That's why I'm here." Bruno got down on one knee, pulling out a ring box. "I talked about getting engaged before, but I never even proposed. So, let me make up for it now." There was a gentleness in his eyes that I'd never seen before. "Give me a chance. Let me love you properly from now on." I looked down at the man kneeling before me once again. A familiar face, a familiar action. For a moment, I thought I'd gone back 10 years. Back then, Bruno had made the same gesture, promising he would never let me down. 18-year-old me had believed him foolishly, but now, at 28, I would seize this opportunity to correct my mistake. I reached out and flipped over the ring box. Bruno looked stunned, while I smiled with satisfaction. "Stop trying to romanticize things, Bruno. I don't have time to play along." I curled my lips maliciously. "You love me? Well, I don't love you. You're being presumptuous right now, and it's making me uncomfortable." Feeling that I'd said all I needed to say, I ignored the man kneeling there with red-rimmed eyes and walked away. Back in my office, I resumed my work. Not long after, I received a personal call. It was from the cemetery caretaker I had hired. He told me Bruno had gone to my parents' gravesite. After laying flowers, he knelt there with his head bowed, and no amount of persuasion could make him leave. Chapter 12. How does he have the nerve? A vein bulged on my forehead. Cursing under my breath, I stormed out of the office. intending to drive to the cemetery. As I headed out the door, I bumped into Pablo. Seeing my darkened expression, this shameless man instinctively decided to tag along. Realizing I couldn't shake him off, I let him follow, hurriedly getting into the car. I suppressed my emotions and drove to the cemetery at the fastest speed possible. When I saw the repentant expression on the man kneeling by the graves, I could no longer hold back my fury. I kicked Bruno aside, leaning down to wipe the space where his knees had touched the ground. Fiona, I know I deserve to die. And that night, you must have felt horrible. You can hate me all you want. I accept it. Bruno knelt on the ground, his expression filled with sorrow. I had enough and spoke in a cold voice. Bruno, do you really not understand human language? Or are you just self-absorbed? No one stays in the same place forever. I gave up on you long ago. Not just once. But Bruno refused to hear it. I don't believe you. You can't just throw away all those years of love like that. Fiona, please. Just give me a chance to make it up to you. I clenched my fists tightly. Pablo, who had been standing nearby, had picked up enough to understand. He looked down at Bruno with contempt and sneered. Bruno, you really are pathetic. Where was this remorse before? You were all over your first love. And now that Fiona's moved on, you want to cling to her? Bruno glared at him, his scarred face looking even more grotesque under his twisted expression. Shut up, Pablo. You have no place in this. I'm warning you. Stay out of. I slapped Bruno across the face. I allow it. What now? I asked coldly, under Bruno's disbelieving gaze. I called security and ordered them to drag Bruno out of the cemetery, along with his filthy flowers. As he struggled, refusing to give in, and stared at me stubbornly, I calmed myself before delivering one last remark. Bruno, you don't even deserve to mention my mother. I'm not angry with you because of her. Quite the opposite. I told my mother before she passed that I felt nothing for you anymore. Seeing the light in Bruno's eyes fade instantly, I pulled my lips into a half-smile. After Bruno left, I remained there, staring at the photos on the tombstone. It wasn't until Pablo, who had silently picked a small bouquet of wildflowers, placed them on the grave that I looked up. Our eyes met, and he smiled faintly. Tell your parents that you will live an incredible life, he said. The restless turmoil within me unexpectedly settled down. Seeing his rarely serious profile, I couldn't help but smile. In my heart, I whispered, Mom, Dad, don't worry, I will be fine. I will lead this company to the peak. After returning, I worked at a grueling pace, accelerating my plans. And so, those who had once predicted our company's failure were left speechless upon seeing our partnership with the government. Soon after, news of a long-term alliance with Pablo's conglomerate dominated the trending topics for 3 days. Our stock prices soared, becoming the biggest dark horse of the year, and my personal wealth skyrocketed as a result. However, the day after the company's overnight success, rumors began to spread online. Chapter 13, Boss. As you can see, the online discourse is all targeting a specific point with considerable cohesion, as if someone is deliberately leading the public opinion. I quickly skimmed through the comments and analysis my assistant had compiled. Overnight, the internet was full of accusations about how I was ungrateful. She used the cooperation with Bruno's family company to gain a foothold in high society. Fiona was engaged to Bruno, yet she cozied up to the son of the wealthiest family and abandoned her childhood love. What a vicious woman. Bruno got disfigured saving Fiona, and she has the nerve to despise him. A person like her can only enjoy the good times, not the hardships. I couldn't help but laugh. The narrative was single-sided, clearly intended to destroy my reputation. There were even candid photos of me having dinner with Pablo, meant to prove my affair for the sake of power. This was obviously premeditated. There was someone behind it. An instinct told me that it wasn't Bruno. Bruno was self-centered, but he wasn't vile, underhanded, or outright foolish. Suddenly, a certain person came to mind, someone I hadn't heard about for a while. I instructed my subordinates to look into Clara's recent activities. Sure enough, it was her, harboring a grudge and scheming behind the scenes. The online discourse grew more and more severe. Though I had pictures of Bruno and Clara, it still wasn't enough. Not enough to completely ruin Bruno and Clara and make them pay the price I wanted. The situation is escalating. Do you want me to suppress it for you? Pablo called me. The usually casual man was surprisingly serious this time. I smiled, politely declining his offer. The rumors were all about me cheating and social climbing. If Pablo intervened, it would only validate those claims and show I was guilty. After some thought, I decided to lure Clara into my own game. I had someone watch her. Once I was sure she was dining at Blue Mountain Restaurant, I made my move, pretending to coincidentally run into her. I walked in with purpose. Under her hateful glare, I called for the waiter. I'll have double whatever this table is having and set it up in a private room upstairs. I glanced at Clara, whose face had twisted with anger, then made my way up to the private room. Sure enough, she took the bait. It wasn't long before I heard a knock on my door. Fiona, who do you think you are? You're still acting like some high-end mighty boss while your name's smeared all over the trending topics. Oh, or is your company going under? And this is your last decent meal? Seeing Clara's face full of scorn, I feigned restraint. No matter how down I am, I'm still doing better than someone abandoned by her own family. Indeed, Clara had been disowned by her family after her scandal, and she had been struggling ever since. As expected, my words infuriated her. All you have is a sharp tongue. What are you so proud of? In the end, you're still left with nothing. I frowned, locking eyes with her. So, it was you behind all this. Where do you get the nerve? Clara, you were the one stringing Bruno along, and he ended up disfigured because of you. Our engagement was ruined. We grew up together, and I never wronged either of you. Why would you want to hurt me like this? Clara's expression flickered with guilt for a second, but then she regained her composure, confident. So what if it was me? Even if you know now, there's nothing you can do. Blame yourself for being so flashy. So what if you're the talented girl, Bruno, who you were always so hung up on, loved me obsessively? I set up just a simple trap, and he was willing to disfigure himself for me. Fiona, you will always be beneath me. I watched Clara's frenzied demeanor with a calm gaze. Only now did I understand Clara's deep-seated resentment, simply because I was raised as an heir, fully trained and capable. Something she could never be. Clara had harbored jealousy for decades. I hadn't even had time to voice my feelings when Clara was slapped so hard she fell to the ground. Chapter 14. Bitch. Standing behind her was Bruno, his face flushed with anger, his eyes practically blazing with fury. Clara, stunned, finally realized she had been set up. She turned her head sharply towards me, her eyes filled with hatred. But before she could say anything, Bruno blocked her. Bruno looked at me, his expression filled with sorrow. Fiona, blame me for what happened. You shouldn't have had to suffer like this. I ignored him and answered a call on my phone. Are you here? Come on up. A moment later, Pablo walked into the room. I called for security and had them escort Bruno and Clara out. Throughout the entire process, I didn't spare Bruno a glance. Pablo, however, couldn't hold back a chuckle when he saw Bruno's defeated expression. Bruno looked enraged, ready to start a fight, but I calmly picked up my chopsticks and placed a piece of food onto Pablo's plate. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Bruno instantly deflate, as if all the fight had been drained from him. Once Bruno and Clara had been escorted out, I finally turned my attention back to my phone, casually tapping on the screen to resume my live broadcast. Yes, I had been streaming the entire time. Under the guise of sharing a casual lifestyle moment, I had unintentionally revealed the truth about Bruno and Clara, exposing their deceit. Before heading out for my coincidental meeting with Clara, I had contacted Bruno with a vague suggestion that I wanted to talk things over. Predictably, he took the bait. This allowed me to use him as part of my plan. The live stream, of course, was done using an alternate account. I had made sure to control the traffic, keeping things low-key initially so Bruno and Clara wouldn't notice. Not until the perfect moment, when everything had built up to its peak, did I give the signal to push the visibility. Every step, perfectly executed. By the time Pablo and I had finished our meal, the live broadcast had already overtaken all the other headlines. It had become the hottest topic, completely replacing the CEO scandal on every trending list. At the same time, my company officially released a lawyer's letter, announcing the lawsuit against Clara for defamation and reputational damage. Chapter 15. Overnight. The tide had completely turned. For so long, I had been misunderstood and vilified. But the truth revealed me as the true victim. This reversal instantly triggered guilt and sympathy from countless netizens. I seized the opportunity, striking while the iron was hot. As more information was released at my direction, the public's empathy grew. Soon, I was celebrated as the most devoted person on the internet. The figure of romantic resilience. The more the narrative favored me, the more Bruno and Clara were condemned. Photos and videos of Clara's debauchery overseas began circulating as rumors, solidifying her new status as a promiscuous, deceitful character. She was subjected to universal disdain, the epitome of hypocrisy. Meanwhile, Clara's final verdict was announced. She was required to compensate me and my company for the reputational damages caused by her slander. When I heard the news, I smiled. Clara had been completely abandoned by her family. To scrape together enough funds to cover the damage she had caused, she could forget about freedom for the rest of her life. Bruno, on the other hand, was dragged through the mud by a flood of enraged netizens standing up for me. They took his scarred face and turned it into a meme, a symbol of his disgrace. Under every video that featured him, there was always someone to comment, "Serves you right, scumbag." His company's PR department was overwhelmed. Unlike me, Bruno had no chance for redemption. The Bruno family company's stock continued to plummet for days. Without the advantage of collaboration with my company, and with the fierce competition of powerful alliances in the market, Bruno's firm's outdated technologies became increasingly uncompetitive. Eventually, the Bruno family company spiraled into decline. In contrast, under my leadership, my company, focused on high quality, was pushed to a new peak. 5 years after the storm settled, the market value of my company surpassed that of Pablo's group. I had become the new wealthiest person. Just as speculation about the youngest female tycoon's love life was at its peak, I announced my engagement to Pablo. After all, throughout the past few years, his genuine love and support had been laid bare. On the eve of our engagement, Pablo's group acquired the Bruno family company. "Sweetheart, look at the surprise I got for you," Pablo said with a proud grin, eager for praise. I couldn't help but smile. I leaned in, kissed him deeply. He understood me. After the acquisition, Bruno was not asked to step down from his position. Having nowhere else to go, he dared not resign. Instead, he was forced to continue working. From a once blessed prodigy, an owner of the company, Bruno had fallen to an ordinary employee, still bearing his disfigured face. Whenever he went online, he was faced with a deluge of disdain and ridicule. Bruno had finally bowed his head. His back bent. He squandered all the good cards he held. And yet, he survived, forced to carry on, only to be mired in mediocrity. That was the ultimate punishment for Bruno, dragging his existence through the muddy, harsh reality of an unremarkable life, without hope or triumph. On the day of my wedding with Pablo, I raised a glass to Bruno from across the room, then turned my hand and poured it out. And I knew then, he would forever be trapped in yesterday, while I would continue to embrace the bright spring of tomorrow.